In this video, I'm going to show you the difference between bad food photography and good food photography using exactly the same ingredients, the same dish. So here I have a stack of pancakes in front of me, and for the second shot, I'm also going to cook up a second batch of big fluffy pancakes like I have here. And I'm going to be using some blueberries, some raspberries, some mint, and some honey to drizzle on top. So it's going to be exactly the same ingredients, but I'm going to plate the good food photography a little bit differently. I'm going to add some props. I'm going to stylize the food a little bit more. I'm going to be more careful about my camera settings and as well take more care of the natural light that is available to me. So this first photo is to mimic your at-home cooking. Let's say you've just finished cooking and you've got a stack of irresistible fluffy American pancakes here and you can't wait to dig in. Well, you're probably going to just go, pull out your phone, quick snap, and then dig straight in. And although that will probably taste better, the photography is not going to be as good. And that's why we want to take a little bit more time to stylize this carefully. So we're going to get a really good photograph here. But first, let's take this photo that's not going to be quite as good. So I want to add some blueberries on top, and we'll put some on here and we'll let some just sort of fall around. And I want to get some to just stick in here. And what we can do is we can use a little bit of the honey to make it sticky. And in a moment, the honey is going to be drizzled all around the front and everything. It's going to look good still, it just won't be as good as what we can achieve. Let's do the same. You see it's sliding all over the place. Let me just move this stack forward a little bit like that. We'll take a few raspberries. And let's do a sprig of mint as well. I'll stack that just in there. Perfect. And now I'm going to take some honey, drizzle all over the top. And there, with just a little moment of styling, we've managed to get a nice looking dish. The purpose of this little experiment we're doing here is to show you that you can get radically different results with the same dish, the same accessories, ingredients, and even the same sort of drizzle effect on your pancakes. I'm going to show you how different it is in the next image, but first let's plate this up and let's take a photograph. So it's ready to eat, can't wait to dig in. I'm going to take a quick photo of my phone. I'm also going to take a photo with my big camera here. This is a Canon 5D Mark IV and a 50mm 1.2. And we're going to kill the studio lights and we'll take a photo. Really nasty, but this is what a lot of people do. They're in their kitchen, they've plated the dish, and despite allow as much light into the lens as possible. This stylistically can be quite good, but it has a major downside, and that is a very shallow depth of field. So if I shine a ton of light into my lens, but the result is we have a very shallow depth of field, and that means that a lot of the dish is not going to be in focus. So we'll do that now. We'll kill these lights. Great, so that's the bad food. We'll go through and shoot this next shot by the window. Come join me over here. It's now 30 minutes later, and I've just cooked up 5 brand new fluffy pancakes. I could have used the pancakes from before, but they were already drenched in honey, and that removed some of the firm and fluffiness from the pancakes. So we started off with a fresh batch. You'll see this setup is quite similar, and we have many of the same props and ingredients, but I've made a few changes here. So primarily, I have not stacked the pancakes yet, and that's because we're going to use an extra little styling tip to make them have a little bit more height and firmness. I've also got some background props. I've got a bowl of strawberries and a glass of orange juice, and I've moved over from the large office table over to the balcony door here. The reason I've come here is because we have a big natural light source. So this whole window on this door acts like a softbox for when we're shooting photography. As it's in the afternoon, it's about 3 p.m. now, we're going to have a nice soft afternoon light, and it's going to be big and soft over the whole of the scene. So no more harsh artificial lights, but rather a big soft light source instead. And instead of shooting it exactly side on, I've turned my desk here by about 30 degrees. That means that I'm going to get some of the front and the side of the pancake stack, and I don't have to worry about one side being overexposed and the other side being underexposed, which you'll see in just a moment. I've also added a backdrop here. So this is just a bit of, I guess it's a grey-blue cardboard that I found in our studio. And what I've done is I've taken a laptop stand in the background and I've folded it over and I've just hung it off the back. It's nothing special. You could prop it up with a box of tissues if you wanted to. This is just what I happened to have available. So let's get started shooting now. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to construct the stack of pancakes. Then we're going to move the props around and compose the scene. It's important to say that previously, when you're taking a photograph in your kitchen or you're just taking a quick snapshot, typically you're holding the camera handheld, you pick it up, find an angle you like, shoot, and you're done. It's quite different with professional food photography in that you take a camera, you set the composition and the camera in the place you want it to, and once you have the framing you're happy with, you then move around the different objects in the scene. So you move the props around the background, or you can move the pancakes closer to the camera, but the camera stays pretty much where it is. This allows you to have some stability in your composition, and it's one less element to think of. You always have a reliable, repeatable camera angle. Let's start now by stacking the pancakes so that they look more beautiful than they did in the previous shot. I'm going to use a tip here that I got from my friend Martina, and it's traditionally used with cake photography. What you do is you take the first layer, like a pancake here, and you add a little disc of cardboard on top. This allows you to have a little bit more height and separation between the layers. It's not going to be discernible to the naked eye unless you get bang on 0 degrees at the side and you look through the pancakes, but we're not going to shoot it like this. So this allows me to add some extra layers. I'm going to do that now, but first I'm going to look for my most beautiful pancake. So there's 5 different pancakes here, and I'll check both sides to see which one I think would look best on top. And I actually think it might be this one here in my hand. So I'm going to save this for last. That's going to go on top. And I'm not just going to stack them any way I feel like. I'm going to examine them and see, okay, where am I getting interesting parts? Do I get a little bit of height here or there? And which way up do I want it? So I think that's quite a good angle here. And I'll add my first bit of cardboard. And then I'm going to go and find another one. And knowing that I'm going to shoot it from this angle, that's the way I'm plating it. I'm having it overlap in some parts and not in other parts because you don't want it to look perfect, you want it to look natural. This one being a little bit bigger, I might just put this on the bottom. Let's try that. And here's a nice stack of pancakes. You can't see the cardboard, but if you can, just tuck them in a little bit. The cardboard discs don't need to be large, they just need to be able to add a little bit of separation between the layers. So now that I have a stack that I'm quite happy with, and notice I'm using a smaller plate here, that helps in a couple ways. It helps with my composition. I don't have to worry about having this massive plate. It's also got a smaller lip here so I can get a better angle on it. The shadow is going to be smaller, and also it helps to add a sense of scale. When you have a large dish on a small plate, it makes it seem a lot grander. So I'm quite happy with that. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to carefully add some fruit to the front. Being careful, you see there's some darker bits on this. Be careful to just use the most beautiful fruit that you have available. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, if it does look perfect, that's going to be more of a negative. So I'm not going to try and do one blueberry, one raspberry. I'm just going to throw them in, and then if I don't like how it looks, I'll change it after that. Don't need to worry about putting any in the background. And that looks good to me. It's not over the top. And we want to add a few on top as well. So let's take a few of the blueberries. They are going to fall off, unfortunately, but we will add some honey to help hold it in place. And maybe a little raspberry here. You see, it is a stack that's moving around a little bit, so we don't have a ton of stability anymore because obviously because it's a high stack and we've got some cardboard in between. Maybe I'm overdoing it here. So I'll use a couple of blueberries, and I'm going to take a little twig of mint. Just add some green to it. If you do want to make a higher stack than this, then I would recommend you use a toothpick or something to help keep the layers stable. There's a burger place that I used to frequent quite often, and they would always present the burger with a toothpick in the middle because it looks so much better that way. You've probably seen this a ton of times when you go out for a burger, is to keep it all together. So it's a very common practice, and especially in food photography. And that leads me on to talk about inedible foods in your food photography. So obviously you wouldn't eat a toothpick, but there's many items that you will find in food photography that are inedible. For example, a very popular thing to do when you're trying to photograph desserts like this and you're adding maple syrup is, instead of using maple syrup or honey, well, I'm using honey here because it's a little bit thicker and to the naked eye you can't really tell the difference, but instead of using this, some people will use motor oil. Motor oil has the same reflective qualities, but it's a little bit thicker and it looks better on camera than maple syrup. Now, I care a little bit too much about my plates here, and I've got 3 people helping me today, and I know they all want to eat pancakes, so I'm not going to cover this food in engine oil, but it is an option for you in the future if you do want to experiment with some alternatives. Now that it's time to start shooting, you'll notice that I have not yet added any syrup or honey on top. And the reason for that is because I want to add a little bit of an action shot later in, and you'll get a shot of me drizzling the honey on. That's just one more element. So now that we have this all ready to go, we're going to start adjusting the background and the composition until we find something we're happy with. So I'll move some of these things out of the way. And we can start playing with the composition. I've decided a scene like this is going to look best in portrait. And in the background, I'm going to add a bowl of strawberries to, I think we'll start with the right, and then we'll add a nice glass of breakfast orange juice to the left. And I'm using live view here to help plate this scene because it allows me to watch the composition as I change it. I can make small adjustments and see exactly what the photograph is going to look like before I even shoot it. I might even bring this camera back a little bit. And we have a napkin or a tea towel here that we can use. And a nice fork to go with it. So this stack of pancakes here is actually hiding this bowl of fruit in the background. So I'm going to switch these round. And the bowl of fruit is obviously not the important part of the scene here, but we do want to have it as a little extra detail to give some context to the scene, make it a bit more beautiful. I have a composition here that I'm really happy with, but having taken a few test photos, there's one minor problem that I'm not really sure I want to have in the scene, and that's this background bowl. It's the same pattern, the same brand, the same everything as this plate in the foreground, and as a result it kind of gets a little bit lost in the frame. It gets lost in the pancakes, and the pancakes just don't stand out as much. So what I'm going to do is I have a second bowl that I can use here instead. I like to have a variety of props that I can play with because it allows me to experiment and get the best results. So I'm going to change out this bowl and I'm going to switch it for a dark blue bowl, which will complement the background a little bit, but it won't stand out too much. By changing the bowl in the background, it's not as dominant in the frame and it allows you to focus more on the pancakes in the foreground. It actually blends in quite nicely, and the green on the top of the red strawberries pairs really well with the raspberry and the green mint here. So I'm very happy with this composition. The lighting is great considering all we're using is natural light. We're not using any diffusers here. In an ideal world, if I was going to have exactly the conditions I want, I would probably also have a reflector here so we can lessen some of the shadows on the right hand side of the frame, but I want to make this an easy setup. I want this to be an easy photograph to shoot, which is why I haven't opted to use that today. Now that we have the composition, the styling and the props all in place, it's important to consider the camera settings. Most specifically, which aperture are we going to use to take this photograph? If I use a really narrow aperture like f/16 on this lens, I'm going to have a very deep depth of field. That means that the bowl of fruit and the orange juice in the background is going to be in sharp focus. If I change the aperture to f1.2, which is as wide as this lens will go, well, it's going to be totally out of focus, and it means that most of the pancakes are also going to be out of focus. So let's experiment now and we can see what that looks like. I'm going to take this first photograph here at f16, 1/6 of a second in ISO 200. And you can see basically the whole entire picture is in focus. If I change that now and I go to f1.2, and I'm going to really have to increase my shutter speed here to 1/1000th of a second, now the entire photograph has very shallow focus. So we want to strike a balance. I want to keep the foreground all in very clear focus so we get the entire dish in all its beautiful detail, while keeping the distance and some separation from the background. So I'll experiment now with a couple different apertures. So let's try, for example, let's try f4. That's probably a really good place to start. And I'm going to adjust the shutter speed now to 1/100th of a second. And as I go into my camera, I like to zoom in and just examine the focus. And I can see the pancakes are all in really good focus with a nice soft background behind, which makes for a really decent shot. I'll experiment a little bit more. Let me try perhaps f3.2. And what I'm trying to do is capture the foreground pancakes in excellent focus while still having that separation from the background. So as long as this foreground's in focus, I'm happy. I want to keep that separation because this is just for context. This is just to show a beautiful, healthy breakfast accompanied by some not so healthy, very buttery pancakes in the foreground. I would say that f3.2 is maybe a little bit too shallow. So I'm going to stick to f4 for this photograph. Now that I'm happy with my composition, styling, props, and camera settings, the final step is to take the photograph. And for that, I'm going to add a little bit of movement. So I'll take a few photographs here with the pancakes with nothing on them other than the fruit. And then I'm going to come in and drizzle some honey over the top. So we get a little bit of that movement and the drips that come off the front of the pancakes. You can only really shoot this once, hitting that pancake for the first time with the honey. So you have to be quite careful and take a few photos in quick succession. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm just going to have a final tweak of the background and then we'll take some photographs of me drizzling some honey over these beautiful pancakes. I'm finally happy with my composition, styling, props, camera settings, and the final step is to add movement. And for that, I've decided to use my intervalometer. I'm shooting my photos on a high-speed continuous shooting. So what I can do is as I drizzle the honey on top, I can press down and hold my shutter button like so. That's going to capture the motion as it hits the pancakes and drizzles down the side. And I'm then able to choose my favorite one from the bunch. And if I don't like any of them, I've then got pancakes covered in honey drizzled down the side that I can choose from too. But I like to give myself the option, and for that it's good to have an intervalometer. You don't have to, you can still hold on to the camera, but it's just one less thing to think about. So, honey at the ready, and I'm going to start pouring. One thing I will add quickly before I mention that you could use motor oil for this, another little trick is to mix whatever you're pouring with glycerin. Vegetable glycerin is fine, and what that's going to do, especially if you leave it overnight, is it's going to thicken out that liquid and it's going to make it a thicker pour. So if you find that maybe the maple syrup is a little bit too runny, use honey or use maple syrup mixed with glycerin instead. And let's go. And there we have a full sequence of honey-covered pancakes. We've got fruit, we've got raspberries and blueberries, we've got strawberries in the background, mint on top, and some really nice props in the background too, with a large glass of orange juice and some strawberries. Overall, I think this came out great, and I'm going to pick my favorite one and share it with you now. That's how to take a bad food photograph, which is your typical snapshot from the kitchen, compared to how to take a good food photograph. It's been a really interesting process, and I hope it goes to show that you don't need any fancy equipment other than a camera on a tripod, and you can even use your smartphone for this. and you can still get some really great food photographs. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are interested in food photography, go ahead and check out the page below. Everything I've just shown you, I learned from my good friend Martina, and she wrote a food photography ebook for expert photography. If you're interested in food photography, it's a really great start. So go ahead and check it out below. Thanks for watching.